I opened the envelope with shaking hands, though it wasn't even addressed to me. It had been slipped under my apartment door like junk mail, but the official crest of the notary's office stopped me cold. My name was printed right there, bold and sharp, next to someone else's, my ex-stepfather's. The document stated that I had co-signed a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment across town, where he had recently moved in with his new girlfriend. At first, I thought maybe it was one of those bureaucratic mistakes. My stomach dropped anyway. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even visited that apartment. Yet, according to this letter, I had legally tied myself to it. Rent, utilities, damages, all supposedly my responsibility if he defaulted. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the realization that this man, who hadn't been married to my mom for over 4 years, still had the power to put my life on pause with a single forged page. He'd once been my guardian in function, if not in blood, managing everything when I was younger. Bank accounts, enrollment forms, even my first job paperwork. And now, he had dragged me into something I had never agreed to, without so much as a warning. I remember sitting at the edge of my couch, letter trembling in my hand, while my son sat at the coffee table coloring. He asked me why I looked scared, and I couldn't answer. How could I tell a child that an adult you once trusted could still sabotage you years later? I kept thinking, why now? Why would he drag my name into this? And then it clicked. His new girlfriend. She couldn't get approved alone. He wanted to show her he had connections that he could provide. And nothing looked better than parading me as the reliable daughter figure who would back him up on paper. But if I didn't stop this, I was going to lose everything I'd been building. The rental history I desperately needed, the credit I'd finally repaired, the security my son relied on. And if I called him on it, I knew exactly how he'd respond. With charm, deflection, and just enough manipulation to make me look like the unstable one. I folded the letter back into its envelope. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. I knew I couldn't ignore this. The question was, how would I face him without losing everything else? Shall I write the next chapter? The next morning, I drove straight to my mother's house with the envelope on the passenger seat. I knew I couldn't sit with this by myself anymore. The pit in my stomach only grew heavier the closer I got to the little blue house where I'd grown up, where his voice still seemed to echo off the walls, even though he hadn't lived there in years. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, like nothing in the world was wrong. The sunlight through the window made her hair look softer, more fragile than I remembered. I dropped the envelope in front of her, and my tone came out sharper than I wanted. Did you know about this? She opened the letter, scanned it quickly, then actually shrugged. Oh, that must just be some mix-up. He still helps with paperwork sometimes. Maybe he added your name by accident. I stared at her, dumbfounded. By accident? A notarized letter doesn't just accidentally put my name as co-signer. This is fraud, Mom. Her face tightened, the defensive edge returning, the same one I grew up watching every time she chose him over me. You're overreacting. He still has some of your old paperwork. Maybe the notary copied it wrong. He wouldn't deliberately hurt you. He's trying to start fresh, with her. Can't you just let it go? Let it go. As if losing my rental eligibility, my credit, and possibly thousands of dollars to cover their living arrangement was a small inconvenience. I felt the heat rise to my face. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the familiar discipline of her loyalty, protecting him, even divorced, even irrelevant. Something inside me broke a little, realizing just how deep his control went. Even without the title of stepfather, he was still wrapped around the infrastructure of our lives. Family ties, community connections, even my reputation. If the landlord believed him over me, Where would that leave me and my son? I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed the document back and stuffed it in my bag. This isn't over. If he doesn't fix it, I'm done pretending this is some innocent mistake. She didn't answer, just turned her face to the window like the conversation had exhausted her. That silence scared me more than any of his manipulation. Because if my own mother wouldn't take my side, who would? But the real gut punch was still ahead, because when I faced him directly, he wouldn't just deny it. He'd flip the story upside down and make me look like the villain. And I already felt the first maneuvers of him setting that trap. Shall I write the next chapter? I didn't have to wait long for the first trap to spring. That evening, my phone buzzed with the family group chat lighting up. My mom, my cousins, even my aunt. A short message from him sat at the top. Small hiccup today, but it's all good. She just panicked when she saw her name on the lease paperwork. Classic mix-up with some forms I filed. Don't worry, I'll sort it. We don't need to make a big deal out of it. My stomach lurched. He'd beaten me to the punch, planting the idea that I was overreacting, dramatic, maybe even unstable. A couple of laughing emojis followed from my cousin. That sounds like her, someone quipped. My ears burned. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. There it was, the first micro-injustice, so subtle yet so effective. He hadn't denied using my name. He'd reframed it as a harmless favor I should have been grateful for. And just like that, the image of me as paranoid, high-strung, and ungrateful was already solidifying. When I called him directly, his voice carried that syrupy tone that always fooled people. Listen, he said smoothly, don't act like I haven't supported you before. You needed someone when you were applying for that first student loan, right? You needed someone to sign off when your car broke down? I trusted you with my name then. Now I needed to trust yours. Balance, kiddo. Kiddo. The word made my teeth grind. This isn't balance. This is fraud. You never asked me. You just... He cut me off. Stop dramatizing. If you can't help family in little ways, maybe you're too bitter for your own good. Everyone else thinks you need to stop twisting things. I almost laughed, except fire rose in my chest instead. Little ways? Being tied legally to the debts of a man who wasn't even my stepdad anymore? But the smoothness in his tone worried me. He believed he'd already won, because he had something I didn't: control of the narrative. When I hung up, my hands were shaking too much to text anyone back, and then 3 dots blinked at the bottom of the family chat. My mom typing. What she wrote froze me cold. Don't push this, sweetheart. He's trying, and you know how people talk. It's embarrassing for everyone if you make this public. I couldn't breathe for a second. Even my own mother was framing this as my fault for making waves. Shame, image, family pride. That's all they ever cared about. Meanwhile, my entire life was one clerical error away from collapse. But if you think that was the worst of it, you haven't seen what he did next. Because the very next time we were face to face, he crossed a line so publicly, so brazenly, that I knew in my gut things could never go back to how they were. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened 3 days later, inside the leasing office of the new complex. I had gone there armed with nothing but my ID, the copy of the letter, and my trembling determination to clear my name. My son was with me. It was a school holiday, and I couldn't find a sitter. He sat quietly in the chair beside me, clutching his superhero backpack, while I practiced how to calmly state the facts. The manager, a lean man in his 40s with thinning hair, looked up when I walked in. His smile froze as his eyes darted past me toward the door. "Oh, he's here too," he said lightly. And there he was, my ex-stepfather, breezing in with that relaxed swagger, as if this was his stage. He clapped the manager's shoulder like they were lifelong friends, then pointed at me with a smirk. She's just here to clear the confusion. You know how young moms get, juggling too much, forgetting what they signed. I swear the air was knocked out of me. Right in front of strangers, my child, and the landlord, he lied without a blink. He framed me as scatterbrained, unreliable, even unfit. My son tugged on my sleeve, whispering, "Mommy?" His wide eyes told me he knew I was being humiliated, and that hurt more than any forged contract. I slammed the envelope on the desk. "I never signed anything. My signature's been copied. I want this corrected now." The manager shifted awkwardly, glancing between us. "Well," he said slowly, "your name is on the documents that came through, and since he already moved in—" "That doesn't matter." My voice cracked, not with weakness, but with sheer outrage. "You're exposing me to financial liability on a fraudulent basis." My ex-stepfather just chuckled, putting on that faux patient tone that had always charmed neighbors. "See what I mean? Drama." She did. Agree. She must have just forgotten. Stress does that. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. Every word he said dripped poison, designed to make me the hysterical one. A single mom overwhelmed, confused, unstable. And strangers were buying it. The manager finally addressed me directly, but his clipped tone was brutal. "Unless he confirms otherwise, I can't amend the documents at this time." I scooped up the papers with trembling hands, pulling my son close. The fluorescent lights above felt like police spotlights, exposing me not as the victim, but as the suspect. As we walked out, my son whispered, barely audible, "Why is he saying you forgot? You never forget stuff, Mommy." His tiny voice was an anchor, reminding me that at least one person still believed me, still knew my truth. But if the office wouldn't move without his confirmation, I was trapped. That night, I realized polite appeals weren't going to save me. I needed undeniable proof, and I knew exactly where to dig. Shall I write the next chapter? That night, after tucking my son into bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and stared at the stack of old folders I'd once promised myself I'd never touch again. Years of forms, tuition documents, car loans, even medical slips. All of them had passed through his hands at one point, because back then I trusted him to help me handle the grown-up stuff. He'd always insisted paperwork was his specialty, and I, too young and too desperate for guidance, had let him. But now, that blind trust was my undoing. I knew I couldn't just scream my truth anymore. Words meant nothing against his charm. I needed something that could pierce through his story, so clear it couldn't be spun. That's when I thought back to an old email exchange I'd had during college. The time I almost cried in a bank lobby because a financial aid officer asked me for the second copy of my loan application, which I didn't have. My ex-stepfather had swooped in days later, smug, with everything handled. He must have kept those old electronic files. I searched my Gmail for keywords: loan, signature, application. At first it was endless junk, but then I saw his name pop up in a forwarded chain, about 6 years old. The subject line still burned. FOD, attached application. My chest went tight as I opened it. There it was, a PDF from my college days, with my clean slanted signature at the bottom. Except looking closer, I noticed something odd. The same blocky crop marks at the edges I'd seen in the lease paperwork. It wasn't just familiar. It was identical. That wasn't my actual ink. It was a digital cut and paste of the old scanned file he'd saved. My pulse started thundering. The attachment headers even betrayed him. The metadata showed the PDF had been downloaded 3 weeks ago, the exact timing of his girlfriend's apartment hunt. I nearly shouted, but instead, I pressed my trembling hand over my mouth. I finally had it. Proof undeniable. something real enough that even the building manager would choke on his condescending shrugs. I sat there breathing hard, every limb crackling with adrenaline. But with proof came another reality. Presenting it meant open war. It meant dragging my mother into something she clearly didn't want to face. It meant tearing through the fragile facade of harmless mix-ups the entire family had already bought. Still, I thought of my son watching me wilt in that office, his small hand in mine as he whispered that I never forget things. If I didn't fight for myself, what lesson would that teach him about trust, about dignity, about boundaries? I closed the laptop and whispered out loud in my silent kitchen, "I'm done hiding." Tomorrow, I would confront him. Not behind closed doors, not in texts he could twist, but right in front of my mother, where no performance could erase the evidence. The only question that kept me awake all night was, would she finally choose to believe me, or would she protect him again? Shall I write the next chapter? The next evening, I drove back to my mother's house with dread so heavy, it made my knuckles ache on the steering wheel. In my bag lay printed copies of the emails and metadata screenshots. I'd even highlighted the timestamp showing the PDF had been pulled 3 weeks ago. I couldn't afford any cracks in my argument. I had to make every detail land. The TV was already blaring when I walked in, the hum of some game show, canned laughter filling the room. My mom was perched on her recliner, remote in hand, and there he was, sprawled across the couch like he still owned the house. His shoes were off, a smug comfort in his posture, like nothing in the world could touch him. I didn't waste a second. I unzipped my bag and dropped the papers right on the coffee table, covering the half-empty soda cans he'd left there. "These are the emails, the PDFs you used, the metadata showing you reused my old college loan signatures to paste into that lease. Care to explain that in front of her?" He barely glanced at them before leaning back and chuckling. "You've really gone off the deep end, haven't you? Metadata, screenshots. You think anyone normal is going to understand whatever conspiracy theory you've cooked up?" But then my mom leaned forward. Something in my voice must have cut through, because instead of instantly brushing me off, she picked up one of the printouts. Her eyes flicked back and forth, squinting as I pointed at the lines. "That signature is identical. And look, timestamp. This isn't from years ago. He downloaded and repurposed it 3 weeks back, the same week she started moving her stuff into that place." He rolled his eyes. "She doesn't get how tech works. Come on, don't let her fill your head with nonsense. This is her jealousy talking." His smirk widened as he turned to me. "You can't stand seeing me build something new while you're still hanging on the scraps. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" But for the first time, my mom didn't jump to defend him. Her fingers paused on the paper, then stiffened. She adjusted her glasses, and I saw it. Recognition. She remembered those exact documents. She'd seen me sign them once, trembling and hopeful in a bank office years ago. Her breath caught, soft but audible. These really are the same," she whispered. The color drained from his face. His grin cracked, just for a second. And I seized it. "Don't you dare tell me I'm jealous. You dragged me into debt without consent, in my child's name too. And now you've been caught. Do you think I'm going to let that slide?" The room was silent except for the TV chuckling nonsense in the background. My mom carefully set the papers down, her face pale, her eyes finally shifting, not at me, not at the proof, but at him. And in that silence, for the first time, I felt the balance of power wobble. The question was, would she finally let it wobble all the way? Or would she pull it back into its old poisonous alignment? Shall I write the next chapter? He broke the silence before my mom could. His voice came out louder than before, sharper, like he needed to reclaim the room. "So what if I reused a signature? I wasn't hurting anyone. I was making sure the lease got approved. Do you even realize how pathetic you sound nitpicking paperwork like this? My mom's hands trembled on her lap. I watched her inhale, as if weighing years of loyalty against the evidence in front of her. She opened her mouth to speak, but he pressed on over her. You want to destroy your own family over some tiny favor? After everything I've done for you, rides to school, paying bills, making sure you didn't sink. This is how you repay me? Public accusations? Dragging your mother into it. The nerve. It was almost beautiful in its twisted arrogance. He wasn't even denying it anymore. He was spinning it into a guilt trip, a martyr play, right in my childhood living room. But I was past fear now. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but steady. You forged my consent. You tried to shackle me to your girlfriend's rent. That's not support. That's theft. And do you want to know what's worse? You assumed I'd never have the spine to call you out. That's over. My mom blinked quickly, once, twice, like she was waking from a trance. She folded the papers with shaking fingers, staring at the copied signature, side by side with the lease. Her whisper split the room. You've been doing this for years, haven't you? His head snapped toward her. Don't start. You don't understand how the world works. I protected us. Paperwork, taxes, loans. Someone had to handle it. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, I saw guilt flood her expression. Protected or controlled? The mask slipped. His jaw tightened. The grin evaporated. His voice dropped, dark and cold. You wouldn't have made it a year without me. Any of you. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mom's hand hovered in the air, as though she wanted to reach for me but didn't know how. I felt my son's absence like a phantom. I was grateful I hadn't brought him here tonight. Finally, she set the papers down with finality. Get out, she said softly. He turned, startled. She didn't raise her voice, but the tremor in her words carried more weight than a scream. Get out of my house. His face contorted, caught between disbelief and rage. But he didn't move. He just stared at me instead, like this was my betrayal, my fault. I stood before he could speak. My words cut like ice. If the lease isn't cleared within a week, I'm taking all of this to the landlord's regional office and the police. And just like that, the war that had been brewing in shadows for years was exposed, undeniable. He stormed out of the house with a door slam that rattled the frames on the wall. I wished I could feel victorious. Instead, all I felt was the crushing silence afterward, and the knowledge that fallout was coming for me. Because men like him, they don't just walk away. Shall I write the next chapter? The fallout came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I got a call from the apartment complex office. I answered with my heart pounding, half hoping they'd say the lease had been fixed. But the woman on the line spoke flatly, almost rehearsed. Ms. Reyes, we've received a statement from Mr. Montoya, my ex-stepfather, indicating that while your name is on the lease, he has taken full financial responsibility for payments. He insists this was a misunderstanding, not fraud. She paused. At this point, we can neither remove your name nor alter the file until the lease ends or legal action is taken. My chest tightened. He was clever. He'd backed down just enough to appear conciliatory, making it look like the whole situation was exaggerated by me. Meanwhile, I was still tethered legally, still liable if a single payment slipped. He'd boxed me into limbo. That night, the group chat lit up again, buzzing like a swarm of hornets. My aunt chimed in. He says he's covering it. Why can't you just let it be? You're dragging everyone through drama. Another cousin added, she feeds off this, always needs to be the victim. Every word made my blood boil. They hadn't read the emails, hadn't seen the evidence, and they didn't want to. For them, it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about who embarrassed the family less in public. And in that contest, I always lost. But then, 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The same stiff notary header at the top, only this one was addressed directly to me. My stomach lurched as I tore it open. It was a lease amendment. My name had been formally struck from the document, effective immediately. The guarantor line now showed only his name. Beneath, his signature scrawled across the page, sharp and furious. Relief hit me first, so hard I nearly cried right there in the doorway. But hot on its heels came the realization of what it cost me. Because attached was another note, handwritten on plain paper. Don't bother calling me again. You got what you wanted. You're no daughter of mine, and don't expect the family to forgive you for this spectacle. The word daughter underlined twice, like a final cut. And he wasn't wrong about the family's reaction. The silence afterward was louder than any argument. Invitations stopped. Favor texts dried up. Even my mom, after that night, barely said more than a few sentences when we spoke. She looked thinner every time I saw her, weighed down by the guilt of having finally seen the truth, and the shame of letting it unravel so publicly. Yes, I was free of his signature traps, but the freedom came with isolation. Half my relatives distanced themselves, whispering that I'd gone too far. But was there any other way? Would I let my son grow up learning to bow his head, to let others rewrite his story? No, never. So I sat at my kitchen table, lease amendment spread in front of me, tears slipping down my face as I whispered to myself, this is what power feels like. Lonely, but mine. Shall I write the final chapter? Weeks passed before the noise finally settled. The group chat grew quieter. Or maybe I just stopped paying attention. At first the silence cut, like being carved out of the family I grew up in. But then something strange began to happen. The air around me felt lighter. I didn't flinch at every notification ping. I wasn't scrambling to defend myself in arguments I never chose. One morning, I found the courage to take my son apartment hunting again. With my credit report cleared and the forged lease finally scraped off my name, I was able to fill out an application without that sick dread in my stomach. The leasing agent didn't look at me suspiciously. There were no whispered doubts about my stability. No chains dragging me back to a man who shouldn't have had any power over me in the first place. When the approval email came through a few days later, I cried like a child. My mom visited once, months later. Her face looked older, softer, weighed with guilt she couldn't quite put into words. We sat in my new kitchen while my son showed her his drawings. She tried to apologize, but the words twisted in her throat before they landed. In that quiet, I realized something important. I didn't need the grand reconciliation I used to beg for. What I needed was the boundary I finally built. And then there was him, my ex-stepfather. I never saw him again. Rumors trickled through. He and his girlfriend fought constantly about money, his image slipping without me as his safety net. Once, I heard he tried to rope my cousin into another deal. But apparently, not everyone was as trusting the second time. His grip was unraveling. The final piece fell into place one Sunday evening. My son, sprawled on the living room rug, looked up from his crayons and asked, "Mommy, are you happy here?" For the first time in years, I could answer honestly, "Yes, baby, I am." Because it wasn't just about the cleared lease or escaping a financial trap. It was about the shift inside me. For so long, I had been terrified to expose the lies, too shaken by the thought of what family would think. But standing in that office, then laying down the proof, forcing him into the light, even at the cost of being cast out, that was the moment I claimed my adulthood, my independence. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt powerless under someone else's thumb. I'll tell you what I wish someone told me. Their control only works as long as you let the shame keep you silent. The second you put the truth on the table, when you decide your voice matters more than their performance, that's the second everything changes. I lost a branch of family, yes, but I gained a home that was mine, a freedom no forged paper can touch, and a future where my son never has to doubt whose side I'll choose. And that, to me, is worth everything.